All right, well, welcome to Product Coffee. I'm Jason Brett, and we want to welcome everybody who's here on the Zoom call as well as those who are watching on YouTube. Today, we're going to have a discussion about jobs to be done. And what happened is earlier or late last week, I saw a question in one of the other product management forums over at Product 404 from someone who was becoming familiar with jobs to be done, understood the concept, and was looking at rolling it out to their teams and starting to use jobs to be done in their day-to-day work. And they were asking for people's perspectives on how it had impacted, how the concept had impacted them professionally and personally, and how they were thinking about how they would think about getting teams on board with the idea and helping people understand how to get value from jobs to be done. And it seemed like a really great conversation to have some practitioners from around the country and several different industries and perspectives join us and talk about how they think about jobs to be done, and then to have a larger discussion with our product coffee roundtable. So that's what we're here to do today. And we're going to spend the next few minutes hearing from a few folks that I've reached out to in advance to talk about this a little bit, and I'll introduce them to you real quickly. And then we're going to ask you, everyone else here, to jump in with your questions, your perspectives. Use the reactions panel down at the bottom of your Zoom client to raise your hand if you'd like to be called on, or if you just can't hold yourself back and need to jump in, that's okay too. You can do that, and we're going to look forward to this conversation. So I want to welcome a few people. Let me start off. I want to introduce Jerry Odenwelder, who has been part of Product Coffee and Product Camp Atlanta for a really long time. Jerry actually saw the post out there at Product 404 and brought it to my attention, said, hey, this would be a great session, and I agreed. And Jerry is with Cprime, where he does product management coaching. So Jerry, why don't you introduce yourself real quickly?
Yeah, good morning, and thank you. As Jason said, I'm with Cprime. I'm a product coach at Cprime currently, and my background is really development. I started out as a developer, actually studied engineering in school and kind of drifted into development, or ventured into it, as I like to say. And then, through the development ranks, came up to a product management role. Just briefly, my experience with jobs to be done goes back to 2018, 19-ish, where a group of us read the book at work and decided to try to put it into practice. So I'll be bringing a perspective of very pragmatic approach to jobs to be done. Thank you, Jason.
Excellent. Thank you, Jerry, and welcome. Next, let's go over to Brenden Fitzgerald, who's a colleague of mine at Method. Brenden, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, Brenden Fitzgerald. As Jason mentioned, I work at Method, so I'm a product manager and product designer there. I've been there for about 3.5 years. Previously, I came from the startup world, so I was the director of product for some startups out in Asheville. If you've ever been there, such a beautiful place to live and work, but Charlotte drew me in with all the wonderful banks that you can come support and have the wonderful opportunity of working at Method. It's just like one of those amazing, creative and wonderful places. And since then, kind of been working in the enterprise financial industry. Currently, I'm supporting Ally Bank within their innovation studio. So doing a lot of visioning and venturing kind of strategy and product work over there. So my experiences with job to be done is kind of probably similar to where a lot of you guys are at. It's like, what does this mean? How can I apply it? What's the value I can pull from it? And then how do I get rid of all the stuff that is confusing or is creating too much noise for me, and then just move on with my life and continue doing the work that I do. So hopefully can add some perspectives related to that learning journey and see how you guys feel about it as well.
Thank you, Brenden. So glad you could join us. Next, let me welcome Michael Barnes. Michael's been joining us at Product Coffee since the beginning as well. He's a product manager or product strategy analyst with Ford Motor Company, and I know you're kind of you've been looking into jobs to be done in a fairly nascent usage there in your role. But why don't you introduce yourself real quickly, and then we'll pivot back around in a few minutes and dive into your thoughts.
Thanks, Jason, and good morning, everyone. Michael Varnes, been at Ford Motor Company since March of last year, and prior to Ford, I was a product manager at Quicken Loans. And in my current role, I am doing strategy and product development work for our enterprise connectivity team. So this is around connected vehicles and looking at different strategies there. And I've recently used the Jobs to Be Done framework, so really introducing it to my team as we hadn't used it before. And so kind of similar to what others have shared, just really looking at ways to apply it pragmatically, but then also to making sure that my team is thinking about the customer as we're looking to leverage out new strategies for connected vehicles.
Excellent, cool. Welcome, Michael, and thank you so much for joining us. And last but not least, I want to welcome Troy Winfrey, who it's Troy's first time here at Product Coffee. And as I mentioned earlier, for those of you who joined the call really early, Troy and I actually met this last week on Lunch Club, and ended up having a pretty riveting and passionate conversation about jobs to be done. So I asked Troy to join us here today as well. So Troy, why don't you introduce yourself real quickly again?
Sure. I'm Troy Winfrey. I am an independent consultant who does qualitative user research. I'm interested in jobs to be done because it is basically a development of a long line of product development thinking that first came to prominence in the late 90s with a pair of folks called Beyer and Holtzblatt. So basically what I do is I listen to customers, but then I apply frameworks and other sorts of qualitative insight machinery to it. So I'm interested so far, like listening to jobs to be done. And this is something I brought up with Jason, is the missing egg. So those of you in Atlanta or even in Charlotte now may have gone to the Flying Biscuit, which has fantastic biscuits. And the recipe for those biscuits is online. But I have heard from good sources that they left something out. And I have tried to make this recipe a number of times. Hasn't quite turned out the way that it should turn out. So typically a restaurant will give you a recipe and then they'll leave out an egg without telling you. And so a lot of the discussion about jobs to be done, even in books like this one, which is excellent, by the way, Callback's new Jobs to Be Done book, is leaving out an egg, which is why you hire the consultant, because the consultant brings the egg, you see. But so let's talk about eggs today and missing pieces and so forth, because a lot of the work I do as a qualitative researcher like fills in these gaps, basically. So I'm fascinated to hear what people have to say.
Very good. Welcome, Troy. Thank you so much. So as we kind of pivot into the roundtable discussion, I do want to set the stage a little bit with this is going to be a very ducks and bunnies view as to how to think about what jobs to be done is for those who aren't particularly familiar with the idea. And so let me share with you, I think everyone here is somewhat familiar with user stories at least. So I think the easiest way to draw a little bit of a picture of what jobs to be done does for you is to compare it to user story, to compare the concept to a user story concept. So for user stories, you tend to think about a structured format of a discussion around a need that takes a format focusing on a specific kind of user. So you might say, as a driver of cars, I want to do something. I want to take a specific action. And that action has an intended outcome. So as a user, I want to do something so that I can get some result. The focus of the user story tends to be on the user and the action in most conversations, as opposed to the outcome they're facing. Jobs to be done, on the other hand, emerged really over about 75 years, but especially in the last few years, it's gotten really, since I think it's about 2003, 2008 or somewhere in there, people started really writing about the idea. And the theory that, or the hypothesis that it kind of follows is that customers don't buy a product to own a product. they buy a product to do a job for them. You've heard it said that people don't buy a drill bit, they want a hole, and that's kind of on the way to the idea, but it's not exactly it either. People hire your product or your company to do a job for them. And so the jobs to be done concept focuses on what that job is that people want done for them, and some of the outcome that they want to achieve as well. But it really focuses on the job that you're being hired for. And the hypothesis is that really opens up your ability to innovate in a better way. And so here's a really bad example. It's not a bad example. It's a pretty basic example. So if I think about a manufacturer of GPS systems, they might take this job to be done and say, when I'm driving, I want to avoid bad traffic so I can get where I'm going quickly and safely. Now, 20 years ago, if I wanted to solve that problem, I would hire the radio station to give me real-time traffic updates and tell me which roads to avoid. But then about 10 years ago, a little company called Waze out of Israel started thinking about a different way, crowdsourcing real-time traffic reports. And that allowed people to actually see in real time where traffic was building and avoid it themselves. Now, in the near future, we'll see cars like, we'll see a lot of connected vehicles that get hired to do this job by simply steering their owners around traffic and getting them home quickly and safely, without even necessarily regarding the traffic as much, but without the owner having to think about the traffic, because they're not even doing the driving anymore. They're getting where they're going quickly and safely. They're avoiding the bad traffic. They're not having that problem. So, and there may be some other perspectives. And so as we switch back over to our panel to get it started, I want to jump in and ask our panel. I'll just ask Brenden, Troy, Jerry, and Michael. Jump in if you have a different or an alternative view you'd like to share than this really basic conceptual view of jobs to be done. Is there another way that you'd look at the concept at a high level?
So for me, it was I'll use the word a completion of personas. We had been using personas before we were introduced to jobs to be done. And after reading the book and attending a workshop, we kind of came to this newfound look, or a new perspective on personas, in that it's really more about what's the problem the customer's having, which you captured in the story, I think. So I think our experience aligns with that. But we tended to look at it more of, hey, this is not just, a person trying to drive a car and avoid bad traffic, but what else might they be trying to do? Maybe they want to avoid the tollway. Maybe they want to avoid the highways or whatever. And then thinking about, where do our competitors? So if you start thinking about market differentiation and how do your competitors solve this problem? Are there opportunities to solve it better, or to go into an area where nobody else is that might be profitable?
I'll add on to.
Go ahead, Michael. Sounds good, man.
I'll add on to what Jerry just shared. So a lot around when you're thinking about the jobs to be done, you have the main job to be done, which Jason alluded to, but then also you have other related jobs. So when I've used it in the past, I've done that 5 why analysis, where I'm really getting laser focused on what the product and / job to be done for the customer. So you may have 5 jobs to be done, but one of them will be your main jobs to be done. You have 4 other related ones. And so I would have discussions with my team to make sure that we're actually solving the problem for our customers. And so that was a good way for me to get more details and just get more knowledgeable about what the customer is actually going after.
That's a great pivot in there, Michael. Thank you. And Brenden, I know we had a pretty good conversation the other day at Method about jobs to be done and 5 whys as well. You want to weigh in on that as well?
Yeah, sure. And I think you said it even when you were kind of covering the job story. You used the word outcome. I think the way that you can start thinking about jobs to be done and jobs is, as you're learning it, think about it as desired outcomes. It's just another way, it's another wording for what is the underlying customer need that someone's trying to solve with your product, right? And so for me, honestly, after doing Tony Olwick's masterclass, reading several books and applying it in my practice for 4+ years, honestly, for me, it's easier to call jobs to be done desired outcomes. Like, what's the functional outcome, the social outcome, the emotional outcome? And I certainly have colleagues and people that I work with that use the terminology, what's the job to be done here? What are the jobs? What are the, we have dialogues within that nomenclature. But another way to think about it is just what's the desired outcome, right? What's the desired outcome of that drill? It's the hole. Well, what's the desired outcome of that hole? Is to hang this picture frame. Is there another way to hang a picture frame? Sure, I could use like a 3M hanger. And so it is kind of like this translation method that we can have dialogue around of what's the underlying customer need within a couple different dimensions of functionality, emotional, and social. So I think that's one of those kind of stepping stones for me, is especially as I started learning a lot about jobs to be done. Even like last night, watching some like YouTubes of like Ulwick and Christensen and thought leaders, I'm like, what the heck are they talking about? Like, it's really confusing to me in a lot of ways, because you start doing like these acrobatics of language. And for me, I kind of use desired outcomes as like a touchstone. That's what we're talking about here. What's the underlying customer need?
Very good. And let me get Troy to weigh in, and then we'll pivot back over here to Jerry real quick.
Well, just to stir the pot, as a qualitative researcher, I start from the viewpoint that I am wrong, and that the product is wrong, and that the solution is wrong. And I have to say, I have never been disappointed in 15 years of practice, right? Because typically, because of the demands of time or whatever, we don't think through a problem adequately. Now, obviously, you can't think through it all the way. It's like seeing every card in a hand of poker. By that point, it's too late, right? You're out of the game. But what you have to do is you have to try to exhaustively examine the problem in the time and scope that you have. And so, for example, I think the best principle to remember about jobs to be done is that Christensen says there should be 150 outcomes for the job, which is a sort of spur. Think of 10 more, guys. Think of 10 more. How about 10 more, right? So in other words, you try to exhaustively look into it and see that thing and get atomic, basically, like break it down to, it's not, I want to find better directions from my GPS. It's, I want to maximize the accuracy of the directions I receive in terms of traffic, right? Which is the jobs to be done that Waze applied itself to. It thought that this would be an innovation that people would pay for, and they were correct because of a lot of other business strategy, which is probably what Christensen was talking about in his YouTubes. That was the lever that would take over the market. And so that's why they applied it. And they also knew that they'd get acquired, which they did. So it's a whole part of a business strategy. But yeah, I mean, you just have to get exhaustive with the jobs to be done, and what you think are the jobs to be done are probably not the valuable ones, because if they were, then you wouldn't be having this problem, right? So in other words, it's things that the customers are thinking about that they're not articulating properly, or you have to go and like drag out of them, right? And then see whether they care about it or not, or if they're just talking.
Great perspective too. And Jerry, you wanted to come back and tie off on something as well.
I wanted to, but I'm a little concerned in thinking about it that I may be taking it down a path that we don't need to go down yet. So I was going to defer to see if there's anybody else on the call or in chat that had a question, and if so, let's head down that path first.
Jerry, can I add one more thing just before we do that? I think an important piece related to just this conversation too is thinking about jobs in the total context of the product development lifecycle. Like, it's easy to focus in on one technique or strategy for understanding our users better and what are their needs and pain points and how do we find opportunities for innovation. And so jobs is just one technique in a myriad across the discovery and delivery process that we use to get a deeper understanding of who are our users, what are their unmet needs, and how might we solve those. And so I think that's just an important piece, is that, you know, when I start talking about jobs with my colleagues or friends, it's trying to really kind of figure out where are they at and how are they thinking about it. It's like you have some people who've read a blog post and say, hey, I'm interested in learning more. And then you have people at your company that may be like, hey, this is going to totally revolutionize how we think about the word money. And so there's like there's kind of this spectrum where you need to kind of figure out what level, what conversation are you having, and what's the desired outcome of that application and technique as well.
Point. I see CB Cavell, you've got your hand up. Why don't you jump in here?
Yeah, so I actually started trying to introduce jobs to be done in a prior role when I was at Stanley Black & Decker, which I think is where that quarter-inch hole quote comes from. But the issue that I ran into, it was a very sales-led organization. And so that assumption that we know what we want to sell the customer and kind of the politics of who knew who, it helped pull back and say, hey, the customer, here's everything the customer's doing to get their job done. They don't need a box. They would be perfectly fine with like a lock on an existing box with some software. Like, here's all the manual stuff that they're doing. And that was a little bit eye-opening for at least people on my team, to not necessarily drown out the salespeople, but pull them along to say, just as opposed to selling something to the customer, just listen. And it was tough because the sales team was driven by how many units they sold, not necessarily providing a solution. So there was always this tough balance that we had to have. And then in my current role, we're actually about to go through some design groups. And I took the Tony Ulrich course. I've actually been connected with the folks at Thrive. I think the Thrive model is interesting because they use 2 dimensions to understand how well you perform with outcomes. It's about speed and accuracy. And as you talk about how fast you can do it, if we talk about how accurately you can do it, you start to find different ways of solving the problem, which with my team, it's like, why are we doing this in the first place? Example, a customer gets an automated email from us once a week on material that's on consignment. And we're like, well, we need to reproduce scheduled reports in our new system. And I'm like, why is that? What is he trying to get done? Well, he takes that email, he puts it in Excel, he sums everything up, and then he generates a PO for us to approve, an approved PO. And it's like, why not just create the PO for him to approve and avoid all these extra steps? Like, that's just a means to an end. So forcing that dialogue of, let's just understand the steps and understanding the outcome, and are there ways we can do it faster or more accurate, has driven slightly different conversations for us. The part where we get stuck, and I've seen this quite a bit, prioritizing. It's easy to start measuring all that. It's easy to lay all that out, but how do you prioritize that work once you've got everything neatly quantified on a piece of paper?
Thank you. That's a great point. And that really kind of gets back to the digging and digging and digging aspect to get past those surface. I want to do a thing. I want to get a hole down to really what is it that I want to accomplish. And I think there's a lot of agreement here, Brenden, that reminder that what they really want to do is hang a picture is a really relevant. I do want to spin around a little bit on this, because one of the things that inspired this conversation was a question about how to help your team if you're thinking about bringing jobs to be done as a tool in your toolkit in discovery and in innovation, bringing it to your team and helping your team embrace it and see the value. How are you going to approach that conversation? Brenden, why don't you jump in and give me your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think for us, it's about how do we use it across our discovery and delivery process. So it is one tool that we're going to use against a myriad of others that we will continue to use during that process. Like I said, to get a deeper understanding of who are our users and what are their unmet needs. Similar to how I would never do a discovery project without doing a user experience map or some type of process of trying to externalize who is our target audience with maybe persona types or some other artifact to kind of have a dialogue of who are we actually trying to be focused on here. So we would first kind of just lay it out within the context of how are we using this one technique and for what outcome. And then when we're thinking about jobs to be done, it's kind of used in parallel. It's not done in isolation where we're sitting in a innovation lab thinking about the jobs to be done with their checking account. It's, hey, we're going to use contextual inquiry and talk to actual users. We're going to try to understand by, actually having generative conversations with our users and evaluative conversations with our users of what is that underlying customer need that we're trying to solve. And as Michael said, kind of go through this dialogue of 5 whys of like, well, why do they need that? What are they trying to accomplish with this? And I think for us, we'll then kind of think about it in 3 different dimensions. What's the functional need? What's the emotional need? And what's the social need? And once we have those, I think for us, it's important to think about, I think the piece that I love about jobs to be done is if you start thinking about jobs or outcomes as stable over time, that's where the power of its innovative kind of like reframing is their customer need is stable over time, but the things that they utilize in order to meet those desired outcomes or those jobs is the innovative opportunity. So today they may be using one product, but tomorrow they're certainly going to be using a different one. And the reason for that is against a number of different criteria, which I think a number of people kind of hit on. It's like maybe this is more efficient, or it's faster, or it's cheaper, or it's just a better user experience. There's a lot of different dimensions of better in the future, but we'll start thinking about what are those levers that we can pull from a innovation point of view once we have a deeper understanding of those things.
So it's not just the job. There are a whole bunch of other factors that go into that decision besides the job and for example, the efficiency, the cost, and so on and so forth.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Matt, you've got your hand up. Why don't you jump in here, Matt?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I did Cavell. I took Jay Haynes' free training on jobs to be done. I thought that was very eye-opening and an introduction to it. I'd never heard of it before. As far as Brenden was saying, I think, one thing I was exposed to in a recent training I took was the development of personas and then linking the jobs to be done to those personas. And I thought that was very effective in terms of just simplifying things. The Thrive, method and just sort of the whole jobs to be done, still trying to wrap my head around it. There's, you got this job steps, development, that's a whole job steps map and all these different artifacts around it. But my question would be along the lines of what you were discussing, Jason, is how can you scale this out to your team and empower them to use jobs to be done in a way that's efficient? Are there some strategies for that? And where do you draw sort of the line between, going deep on, say, contextual inquiry versus maybe just starting with some fundamental building blocks of personas and what are the different jobs people are trying to do? I really like Michael's concept of the main job and the 4 related jobs.
So that's a great question. Jerry, looks like you want to weigh in on that.
Well, I just wanted to the way that we got it into our teams, we started making it part of our vernacular. So when we would talk to our teams about what we were trying to accomplish, we talked about it in terms of the job the customer wanted to do. And so because we started using this, and all of the product managers started using this vernacular, it really became something that after a while, the team actually started asking us questions in the same context. So when they would come to us with clarifying questions, they were always framed around, well, if the customer's trying to do this job and accomplish this outcome, ... fill in the blank with whatever the question was. So I would say, like, if you want the team to embrace it, like just start putting it out there, like make it just part of the way you talk about things. They'll pick up on it and run with it.
Good. How about you, Troy? What are your thoughts? How would you approach approach that task?
Well, first of all, the classic missing egg is the qualitative interviews here and the contextual inquiry. That is like a tiny little sliver on the wheel. That's like 90% of the value that Strategind used to produce. I mean, that's the missing part. Keep that in mind. It has to be somebody's job. Sitting around thinking of jobs is not, I mean, you know, it may get you there. It's not going to get you where you need to go if you're trying to be innovative or, you know, beat a market or grow or whatever. In terms of getting into the organization, I mean, if you talk to your devs, they have rules about committing code. How did that happen? Right. So in the design world, in the research world, we're talking about research ops more and more often, which is to say the set of practices you go to make sure that research is collected and then disseminated appropriately throughout the organization, maintained, and so forth. Jobs to be done is that kind of thing. It's an operational practice. It's just as important as clean code commits, right? And not overwriting like somebody's branch or whatever. So when you can talk to the devs and see how they do it and get some ideas, it's very informative. But also, once you get everybody playing the same game, looking at the same map, they are going to start referring to it to build relationships with other people because that's what humans do. We're wired to do that. So once you get this going and keep repeating it, it should take off. And if it doesn't, then it's, you know, it might be the organization. It might be time to consider a different field in which to cast this crop, as it were.
Michael, anything you want to add from your recent experiences there? I know this is a kind of a fairly new rollout for you. How have you approached it?
Yes, I want to say plus one to what Brenden said earlier around when you're looking to implement jobs to be done, you have the emotional piece to it and then also the social aspect. And as we think about advocating for customers, not only are they looking to get the job done, but they also have feelings behind how this job and product they're looking to hire is going to impact them. And so when I was rolling this out, I was also mindful of just the emotional connection to doing the jobs to be done and really advocating for the customer. And so it allowed my team to not only just look at it from the standpoint of we're just like getting this job to be done for the customer, but there are other aspects related to it, how the customer feel and how they're going to be impacted by it.
I'd add to that too, Michael, on like, I think examples are awesome when you're talking about jobs to be done, just because, you know, there is kind of like this acrobatics of like language that you have to use when people are introduced to jobs. There's kind of this learning curve and you can read books and things of that nature, but examples are really helpful. Like, why did my wife buy the new Peloton, right? Like, why did she hire, what job did she hire the Peloton to do for her? Like that's kind of like a weird transactional way to describe how people use products and like what they want them to like you know, the outcomes they want in their life. But if you think about it, it's like there's a functional role of the Peloton, there's an emotional role of the Peloton, there's like community-based roles of the Peloton and social. And so you start reframing like what is the desired outcomes of the Peloton is multidimensional, and then you kind of get at the core of some of these. Why did she hire a Peloton? There's different dimensions to that, which is helpful. So examples are a really good way to start having people understand. And then when you make that kind of translation that, well, in the morning, I hire a cup of coffee to wake me up. Well, there's a lot of different products that you could hire to wake you up, right? Like there's tea, there's actually energy drinks, there's morning push-ups. Like you could actually even start translating that there's products that compete in the same space, but you didn't even realize it as a means for figuring out what's your competitive space for sure.
And that is truly the heart of innovation right there, is understanding not only the context that you're currently in. And that gets back to the overused example of if I'd asked a man what he wanted, he would have said a faster horse. It's overused example, but again, it kind of gets back to the core of that, is that you really start thinking about when you're thinking about the job you want done, you think about all the different ways that you could possibly accomplish that job. And that opens up the mind to really innovating around the problem, so that you're not just iteratively improving a circumstance, you're examining an entirely different way of thinking. Jump over here to Denise real quick. You've had your hand up for a minute. Denise, what's on your mind?
Hi, yeah, good morning. I just wanted to throw in a small suggestion. Some of the examples folks talked about relating to how to operationalize this, right? How to make it more of a regular thing we do.
Yep.
I had some success at one large company and not so much at another, including various functional partners to listen in to research when it made sense, right? If you're doing a focus group in person, it's a little harder. If you're doing phone interviews, if you're doing some online viewing where you can have a secret observer or a secret listener, I really had some great appreciation from partners in the customer engagement team, in the operational or sales implementation teams, in the even engineers and tech folks who don't get out much away from their programming. They really enjoyed having the exposure, and then they started to learn what it really meant when I said, customer said ABC. Well, now they probably heard someone say ABC, so it made a lot more sense, and it was a way to educate the rest of the organization.
Yeah. Tried and true research tactic.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It gets buy-in really fast, especially the higher up the chain you go.
Yeah. If it works, it really works pretty quickly. You're right.
I was going to say another way that has, at least in my current role, that's helped me integrate jobs to be done is just using it as a way to document current processes. So I don't know the space and how we get our job done. We have about 1,300 field folks. And so going out and doing the interviews, but structuring without basically telling folks jobs to be done without telling them, but structuring the synthesis of what I'm saying in that format and using some of the words that at least will seem somewhat familiar has helped. And we've kind of structured some of the work along those, hey, there's some core jobs, there's some administrative jobs, there's some security type stuff, but using it as a way to document current state without necessarily saying, oh, we need to go figure out how to innovate. We can start finding holes and start asking questions of, oh, why are we doing it that way? I'm just documenting,
Yeah.
But it would be helpful to understand why we do it that way. And you start to uncover some stuff, which has been pretty surprising.
I've had success with that too, Cavell. It's a great way to get people to think about it without actually talking about jobs to be done or any particular approach.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just writing it down. All I want to do is understand.
I play Columbo a lot. I say, I'm going to ask you questions that I think I already know the answer to, but I'm going to still play dumb and ask you. And that gives you also a great air cover to ask really dumb questions.
Yeah.
That's so Troy. It sounds. I wanted you to also. You got something you want to say, but I also wanted you to specifically weigh in on the other aspect of what Cavell kind of led to was. How do you, from a confirming perspective, how do you dig in and say, hey, we think this is the job that you have done, that you want to have done? How do you confirm that without putting words in your customer's mouth as part of that discussion as well? And then we're gonna come back to Tiago here in just a moment because I had something I wanted him to talk about. Go ahead, Troy.
There are a number of ways to do that. The classic method, which Strategine uses, if you have the resources, is to do conjoint analysis of jobs. And typically what you do is you do a massive survey to your customers, ask them, how important is this job to you? How well are we doing it? And then you do an analysis because some jobs that you're doing well may not be important to the customer, right? And so you're looking for those, and that could be a way to narrow it down. If you have a smaller scale, and you were doing classic task analysis interviews, which is what we were just talking about, you want to act like a 16-year-old apprentice who's bright, but kind of just completely naive. So what do you do then? Well, what do you do then? I got to do this job tomorrow. What do you do then? And you keep doing that, you record it, and then you extract a job flow from that, and then start looking at in the contextual design book, little places where a lightning bolt is, which is a friction point or whatever, and then take that, do a design workshop, prototype it, and then present the new solution. You can also one technique I like, ask people what would be expensive for a value proposition that you have. So in other words, okay, so we're looking at this new software. The guys, it tells you when a bus is coming anywhere in the country. What's an expensive price to pay for that? And they will tell you really what that is the minimum price, the ceiling price. What is way too expensive? And that's the upper bound. And if their answers are ridiculous, then they're not interested in the product, or if they hesitate or whatever. So you can do sorts of things like that, right? Try to price it out, but make sure it's not your product. You're just asking questions about this for, those guys in the engineering department, play dumb and try to frame it as more expensive than it actually is, right? So in other words, always ask, what's an expensive price for this? Not what a fair price is, because that's going to lead you down the garden path.
Thanks, Troy. Completely agree. I do want, so Tiago, I want, just for the benefit of the folks who are watching on YouTube, you made a comment up there in the chat a moment ago, and I wanted you to come back to that. And you had your hand up a moment ago. We may have gotten to your point already, but if you want to kind of circle back on the Scrum analogy you made in the chat, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. So in the software development with Scrum book by Mycon, like ages ago, looks like it's years ago right now, he mentioned something about how to introduce a new process, and what he actually did, he used the analogy with the trophies at the entry hall of a company, like the best software, the best company. And he said, well, forget about the trophies, and also forget about the techniques. So you can remove also bias from the people who will be involved in this process, and you just start implementing things. You start having the conversation, and once you bring, I think it was Jerry's comment, to bring it to your vernacular, right? Once it's internalized, then you can say, oh, okay, yeah, this is a technique ABC, right? And then you really get more buy-in from people. And the reason why I raised my hand was to piggyback on something that Cavell mentioned about engaging with like the questions and how to get things done. Coming from a startup environment, it takes a lot of time that I usually work with the customer success team, customer support, and sales. And then to Troy's point, I try to do some task analysis in the beginning, but really in the sense of walk me through your day in the life and tell me everything that you're struggling with to get your job done. And rather than just trying to validate hypotheses or or drive or prime the conversation to somewhere where I can just confirm my suspicions, right? I really play naive and say, okay, well, I just tell me how you get your job done and the things you struggle with the most. And that's when you document to start noticing patterns around, like from different customers, right? The things they are struggling with that can be of significance.
So that, I think that's a really good example. Getting back to Mike Cohn and his view, and it really speaks to the how do I introduce this new concept to my team and get them to embrace and adopt it? Well, his answer is, well, you just start doing it. Don't tell them we're adopting a new thing, we're trying a new process. We're just, hey, I did some interviews and here's what I found out. What do you think this means? Let's have that conversation. Oh, by the way, so let's take the outcome of this conversation that we've had with the team and this is called a job to be done, by the way, and here's what we've just done, and how does everybody feel about this? Is a great example. So thank you for raising that up, Tiago, and I appreciate you circling back and being here. So we've got just a few minutes left, so I want to kind of go back to it, and feel free to throw your hands up, everybody here, if you have another question or a comment that you want to throw in there. But I do want to kind of circle back around to our panel here in just a moment. Matt, jump in here real quick before we do that.
Yeah, just quick question. Is there any scenarios where you should not be using jobs to be done, or any gotchas?
Oh, that's a
that
great
you need to be aware
question.
of?
It's a great question. Let's start with Jerry. You mentioned to me kind of in a side chat that you'd had some less than desirable experiences with jobs to be done, and so I'd love to apply that experience to Matt's question. What are some scenarios that you would say, yeah, this is not the right tool here. This is not when I want to be thinking about this.
I'm reaching to think of that because my negative experience is what I was going to kind of touch on earlier when Brenden mentioned it was really confusing and Troy was talking about, 100 outcomes, get more. I feel like my less than stellar experience with it was more about that. We tried to boil the ocean with it. I can't think of a case, at least from my experience, where at least thinking about what the customer's trying to accomplish is not good. I can't think of one. I'm sorry.
That's a great answer. Brenden, how about you? Thoughts? I know
Yeah,
you're a little bit of a contrarian on jobs to be done sometimes, so throw it at me.
I love the desired outcomes of jobs. I think the only time I wouldn't use jobs or the vernacular jobs is if people are getting twisted up about like just how the language that we're using. I would kind of just reframe it because to Jerry's point, I can't think of a time when I would never want to understand the underlying customer need beyond just like the feature or product that someone's utilizing when I'm thinking about building digital solutions or new ways to innovate. So, but if people are getting hung up on just the word jobs to be done or jobs, or they feel like that's not a human-centered way to talk about our users, then I would ditch that vernacular and I just talk about desired outcomes and that there's functional, social, emotional aspects to it. They're stable over time. We want to understand their importance to people versus their satisfaction that they're finding. And this is all about finding those underlying customer needs. And I would just move on and not say the word jobs.
Yeah, I think that's when people get hung up on the words, don't use the words. Just focus on, once again, what's the job that we're trying to get done with this concept?
Right.
Let's focus on the outcome we want. How about you, Michael? Any parting thoughts?
Yeah, when I think about, so I haven't had an experience yet where I don't see the value of not including jobs to be done, but what I want to leave the group with is if you're looking to implement jobs to be done, really just keep on top of mind how you can advocate for the customer. And so I really like the discussion we had earlier about just looking at the different aspects of jobs to be done. So your related jobs, how it's making the customers feel, but then also to Brendan's point earlier around just providing examples and bringing it all full circle so that way your team and people that you're working with can really see the value of the framework.
Thanks. And Troy, I'll give you the last word here.
I've changed my practice based on what I've learned of 15 years of research and jobs to be done and various other frameworks. And basically, I prefer to work with very senior leadership at this point because our incentives are aligned. And at lower levels, in middle management, whatever, the incentives are not always aligned. People do not always want to actually do the work to move the needle, despite what they say they're doing. And so in this case, you may have a really bad time trying to bring in research or jobs to be done or what have you, or getting as rigorous as you need to be, right? So like anything else, it's like, okay, what do we want? How much is it going to cost? So that's what I would say. Personally, I'm a big fan. I have sort of aligned my life so that, I have to deal with this as little as possible. It's something I've learned over my practice. Others, we all make different choices and so on, but just assess the ground before you go in. If you want it to really, really work, then it's going to take a lot of work. The second thing is, and I'll just pass this along as an easy tip. When you're doing your analysis, when you are looking at how people do a job, look at their behavioral patterns. That is the other missing egg. That is the huge secret. So in other words, what is the style that they use to make decisions? So for example, quick example, I had to find a new doctor. So I looked on every doctor in the internet and I found a great one, right? My mother would ask her friend Mary. These are two fundamentally different behavioral patterns. So if your app involves social recognition, social promotion of doctors from friend to friend, and everybody you talk to is doing internet research, rethink that drink. You got to pivot, or you got to find people who actually like behave that way. It seems very simple. It can often transform the entire product. Peloton is so successful because it's a product for people who want to work out in a gym without being around other people.
There was another hand up, and I wanted to kind of switch back over to, for anybody who'd like to stick around for a few minutes. Faith, you had your hand up, and I wanted to make sure that we sealed things up nicely, but at least had an opportunity to come back and hear what you had to say or hear what your thought was.
Oh, thanks, Jason. I was thinking about a lot of the work that I do in enterprise software, and just how, depending on who the customer is, like who I've identified as the customer, the job that they're trying to do is going to be different. And I was, wondering, and maybe it's something for even a follow-up or some offline discussion. I'm happy to talk with anybody outside of this forum, but if in our particular case, it's HR software, so the hiring manager, they want to hire somebody and, fill their position. The software we sell is really targeted to recruiters who they have other things that they want to do, right? They want to provide candidates, they want to screen candidates, they want hiring managers to follow a process. Hiring managers don't necessarily care about that process. So depending on who I talk to, and all those people are stakeholders. So it gets from beyond, somebody trying to go drive from A to B, or somebody trying to hang a picture on a wall. We come into complex scenarios where there's multiple people that we might be designing for who have different interests, and maybe even fundamentally incompatible differences. So I don't know how that would have affected the discussion, but it certainly would have taken things like kind of off track. So maybe a follow-up for a different day.
Yeah, and Andrew kind of took your kind of said, in his example, the user of his product's not the buyer. It's B2B with hundreds of customers instead of much more if it was B2C. Would love to hear anyone's thoughts on that. Brenden, you want to jump in there?
Yeah, sure. I think that's an important part about context, right? Like we hire different products to accomplish different things. And let's say I wanted a clean floor. Like that's kind of where I landed with the 5 whys. Well, the context of that clean floor takes a lot of different dimensions. Maybe it's somewhere that's a hardwood floor, or maybe I don't even want to mess around with it, so I hire a robot vacuum. Maybe it's outside, and so I hire a leaf blower, or maybe it's just, I need to clean up some type of like little thing with a broom, right? So the context of why we hire products to accomplish jobs is really important. I think that's a way to start thinking about segmentation and your target audience. So to me, that's more of a discussion about those two topics and not necessarily the jobs. And then you can have kind of a reframed conversation about jobs to be done, the desired outcomes within those bounding contexts that may be more meaningful to you. And then you can start thinking about, well, maybe that adjusts our product strategy. Maybe that adjusts the way that we even think about building our software. Maybe this is 2 different approaches to those types of things, which will have some like really deep and meaningful conversations within your organizations when you start thinking about those bounding contexts.
Jason, one of the, just jumping in here, one of the things Faith pointed out was different stakeholders with different values or different desired outcomes. In an enterprise situation, I'm reminded of Bruce McCarthy's shuttle diplomacy conversation where, go to these people one-on-one and talk with them about how you might reach some way to solve both problems. in a non-enterprise situation, I know I never felt like I talked to enough customers, and I don't know why I've got this frog in my throat, but I never felt like I talked to enough customers. And every time I talked to a new one, my perspective changed a little bit. Well, early on it changed a lot, but over time it changed a little bit. So that would be the other thing. Like, keep those channels open with as many customers as you can.
Yep. Troy, what you got?
It's a multifaceted thing. Everybody says that B2B is different from B2C. Everyone. It's 101, which immediately makes me suspicious. And in fact, in my own experience, this has not been true. Bs are made of Cs, as I like to remind my clients. And a lot of tactics that'll work on Cs will work on B2B. If you are, the main thing is you have to have a map. Make a map. If you've talked to a bunch of customers, what are the themes that keep coming up? Narrow down which customers are overweighted in the use of your product, because there are somebody. Big mistake I see is everybody thinks the product has to be as big as possible and it has to be for everyone, which means it's going to end up being for no one. So if you have a whole bunch of different jobs, look at what your product does really, really well, based on what you think and based on what customers think, and then double down on that. Because honestly, that's going to be the beachhead that'll help you spread. Now, Ford may not be able to do this. If you're working on the F-150, you may not be able to do this, but that's also an established product. If you're smaller, think about thinking smaller and doubling down on that, because you're going to learn a lot. And secondly, if you're talking to a bunch of customers, make a map of what they're saying. Draw up and extend. So instead of all these different roles doing different stuff, the job is send. This person sends to this person sends over to here, whatever. What are all the sends? How can you agglomerate them, as it were, streamline them and simplify? And so once you have a map, you can start simplifying. And this is way too much and way too little, but basically try to look for big patterns and then focus on those patterns, double down, right?
You said something, and there's a comment here as well from Cortland. Who's hiring the product is the first question, and there's a slight slightly different perspective I like to bring to that question as well. With what you were all saying, Troy and Cortland, it's not just about what are customers hiring your product to do. There's an important factor here that Brenden touched on early in the conversation. It's which customers do I actually want to be serving? And what is it that the customers that I want are hiring me to do, that are hiring my company to do? Because and that gets back to your comment, Troy, about being everything to everybody and scoping it down and being really focused about who you want to serve. The first order of business is to understand very specifically what is the market that we wish to serve, that we are trying to serve. Who is the customer that, for lack of a better term, we care about as an organization? And then what are the jobs that they are trying to do that we can help them with our unique expertise, as opposed to what are we being hired to do? Very often we can be distracted by solving needs of customers who actually won't carry our business forward. If I solve the needs of 12-year-olds who are looking for a piece of candy, then I'm not going to solve the needs of a mother who is looking for nutritional food for her family.
Yeah. You've got to be careful with that with sales too, because Cavell was talking about this earlier, right? They are incented very differently than product people. And in your example, right, you want to feed you want to provide nutritional food. And if sales has got a bunch of 12-year-olds lined up who just want gummies, gummy bears, not the other kind of gummies, folks.
Well, what you would want is an indulgent, healthy treat aimed at mothers.
Yeah.
Feels indulgent, makes her feel like a good mother, but it's also healthy, which also makes her feel like a good mother, right?
And
so if that's the kind of mother you're... Sure. That is indeed what a fruit roll-up is, I think. Also, it's probably like waste fruit, which is another great product strategy. A lot of the people I'm following are talking about product-led growth rather than sales-led growth. And that's where all the cool kids are headed, right? So less sales-focused organizations are more product-focused. And the hot topic, if you guys want to dive into, what the cutting edge of the Valley is doing, is cohort analysis. So this started in SaaS and it's applying to applicable to other businesses. Figure out what that big lump is doing, the biggest, most profitable lump, and then base everything on that. And it's easier to do, especially if you've got a SaaS, but it's possible. It's a great lens for other business problems you might be having. Because when you look into it, you don't, I saw a thing yesterday, 70% of the real estate agents in Florida own dogs. So this guy led with a marketing campaign with lots of dogs, bio of dogs on the page, and all this, because he bought a list that showed that all these realtors were buying all this dog products, right? So you would never guess that, but by appealing to that sort of behavior, you get this oversized effect, right? And often that's the case. It's Pareto, 20% gets you 80%.
We are definitely over time here, and we're going to have to close it down here in just a minute. I see Cortland, you've got your hand up, and I want to let you jump in here. And I want to thank, once again, for those who are still here. We were officially done. Stick around for a few more minutes, and let's just continue the conversation. We had some great first-time visitors today. John from University of Kentucky, glad you could join us. Thanks for coming. We also had Catherine Sullivan joined us for the first time. Misam Farudistan, I think I got that right. Aaron Young, Arad Adler, Denise, you've been here before. I don't know why it showed you as a first time, but we'll take it anyway. Welcome back. Maybe it's a new email address. But thanks, everybody, for joining us. Cortland, what did you have to weigh in on as we're wrapping up here?
Oh, I was just going to share the difference in the user versus the hirer of a product. We had a great shirt that was great for FR protection for workers. It was comfortable, moisture wicking, all these great features. And that was important to the user of that product. The trick was we were selling to the safety manager who specified the use of that search. So it was the classic, it's the same product, but you had to package up the benefit of it very differently to the user versus the specifier or the hirer of that particular product. So I think oftentimes you can get in this narrow mind of, oh my gosh, what's the job to be done? Let's really focus on that. And you kind of lose perspective of, oh, well, the job is the same, but how you explain it can be different based on the role in the purchase cycle.
And Michael had to drop a few minutes ago, but that kind of goes back to his, what are the 4 other jobs? So the buyer in your case is the safety manager, and he's got a job that he needs done. But at the same time, there are other jobs. He's got one of the jobs that's not maybe at the forefront of his mind, but is important to his success, is the team that he is responsible for keeping safe needs to appreciate his work and the selections that he's made as well. So
Yeah.
I mean that's kind of super simple.
And it's Troy's map exactly, right? Here's the product in the middle. This person wants this person wants that.
Yep.
And if you can solve for all of those at the same time, it's a win-win.
Because twist, here's a job. Who likes a safety manager? Nobody. Really? You're coming in, you're making me wear, what? Okay, so you lead with, they're going to love to see you.
Yeah.
All these guys clamoring to put on the shirt, from the safety manager. And that's an emotional job for the safety manager. Stop hating me. And a lot of jobs have that. A lot of roles have that job to be done. Stop hating me.
Stop hating me.
Yeah, stop hating me.
Procurement.
Yeah, I mean, the world is your oyster.
Stop hating me. I'm writing that one down.
Stop hating me. Let's put in jobs to be done to minimize the amount of hate directed at my person. That's how Christensen would phrase it. But yes, stop hating me.
Well, hey, thanks, everybody. It was a great discussion. I'm really thankful to everybody who participated and was able to stick around later, and really enjoyed it today. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful week, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.